Wisdom of the Middle Way. Nagarjuna's Mulamadhyamakarika. Translation and Commentary by J. L. Garfield. Part 2, The Text and Commentary. Chapter 14, Examination of Connection. The word here translated as connection, phrad-pa, is the term denoting the relation between the components that are compounded in any compounded phenomenon. It can also describe the relation between two things coming together in space and time or colliding, or two things fitting together, and while this can be taken fairly literally in the context of physical objects when they are understood as compounded of their parts, the relation is actually much more general than that. In fact, the example that Nagarjuna takes as central, and one that is used by some earlier Buddhist theorists as an example of a case of connection in this sense, is visual perception. In such a case, according to the proponent of the reality of meeting, or compounding, the subject, the sensory organs, the sensory faculty, and the object join together, or connect, not in a literal physical sense of spatiotemporal coincidence, but rather in the sense of forming an ensemble. Sense perception is, on this view, the entire compound ensemble. So, dialectically, this chapter follows quite naturally on the heels of the examination of compounded entities. For we can imagine an opponent might reason as follows: Nagarjuna may be right in denying the inherent existence of compounded entities in virtue of their dependence upon their parts and upon their parts being compounded, but surely since these phenomena depend upon being compounded, that relation, the connection, exists. This chapter is aimed at replying to this position. 1. The seen, seeing, and the seer, these three pairwise or all together, do not connect to one another. First, he claims, these things simply don't occur in the same place at the same time. There is no literal sense in which they connect. 2. Similarly, desire, the desirous one, the object of desire, and the remaining afflictions, and the remaining sources of perception, are understood in this threefold way. In the various chapters on the relation between characteristic and characterized, Nagarjuna has argued that it makes no sense to think of the relation between individuals and their properties or between entities as any kind of relation between independent entities at all, and that these phenomena cannot be understood as the same, as different, or as neither. 3. Since different things connect to one another, but in seeing, etc., there is no difference, they cannot connect. In order to have things that connect in the relevant sense, they must be different from one another, but as we saw in the chapters on characteristics, on desire, on seeing, on action, on motion, and on the self, the differences of the relevant kind are not found on analysis. 4. Not only in seeing, etc., is there no such difference. When one thing and another are simultaneous, it is also not tenable that there is difference. This problem emerges not only in the analysis of intuitively unitary phenomena like vision, but is perfectly general. Things that are separate from one another cannot be coherently thought of as inherently different entities either. For without any inherent identity, there is no basis for inherent difference. This recalls the argument of Chapter 1. 5. A different thing depends on a different thing for its difference. Without a different thing wouldn't be different. It is not tenable for that which depends on something else to be different from it. For there to be substantial difference, it must be possible to independently establish the identity and natures of the relata. But this, Nagarjuna has argued repeatedly, is impossible. 6. If a different thing were different from a different thing, without a different thing could exist. But without that different thing does not exist. It follows that it doesn't exist. That is, the only way that difference, or the identity of a different thing as different, could be shown to exist inherently would be for that difference to be present independently of the existence of another different thing. But that is not so. The only alternative would be to argue that difference is present independently in single things. But this ignores the relational character of difference. 7. Difference is not in a different thing. nor is it in a non-different thing. If difference does not exist, neither different nor identical things exist. So difference cannot be located either as a relation between things or as a unary property of individual things. So there is no inherently existent difference. But it is the existence of inherent difference that grounds the problem of connection. So there is no such relation, and no problem to be solved. 8. That does not connect to itself. Nor do different things connect to one another. Neither connection nor connected nor connector exist. The conclusion is a powerful one and, especially when conjoined with the conclusion of the previous chapter, goes to the heart of any Buddhist, or non-Buddhist, for that matter, ontology that seeks to reify the entities that appear at any stage of ontological analysis. It is quite tempting when examining dependent, compound phenomena to think that while they themselves might not be inherently existent, and might not be the ultimate entities of the empirical world, it must at least be a fundamental fact that their being constituted of parts, or dependent upon their location in a causal and mereological nexus, exists as a fact. That would seem, in fact, to be the natural way to interpret the doctrine of dependent origination and the emptiness of macroscopic entities. But Nagarjuna here pulls the rug out from any such analysis, pointing again to the emptiness of emptiness. Not only are compounded phenomena empty of inherent existence, but so is the relation among their constituents and determinants in virtue of which they are compounded.